Good evening. I'm just now receiving word that the CIA is set to receive a Pulitzer for their hard-hitting journalism. This is Inverted World Live. Well, your perception is under attack, as it always has been since the dawn of time. Alex, how's your perception?
I think it's okay.
No attacks on your end?
It's been a freaking week.
I don't know what you're talking about. Well, I'm Shane Cashman, and I am the host of this wild and wonderful show.
It's great to be here.
Wild and wonderful West Virginia. Yeah. Alex, our guest today is Mr. J. Dyer. Can we bring that man in?
We can do that, sure.
Jay, welcome to Inverted World Live. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, man. Glad to be here. Very rainy, balmy Sunday over here in Florida. It was nonstop torrential downpour. So
I like that I can't see any of that
on the internet with you.
The neon behind you cancels out whatever grim world is around you. So that's nice.
Yes, it's always a drug lord, Panama aesthetic going on over here. So
I appreciate it. So I was thinking about you last week because we mentioned you when we were talking to Top Lobster and Dave with Nephilim Death Squad, talking about politics and how politics have become theatrical. Maybe not have become, maybe always has been. But before we get into that, I thought it would be interesting to hear you talk about the simulation theory stuff, because it was my hopes to have you on the culture war recently. The simulation debate didn't work out, unfortunately, but I thought you would have been a great person, a great voice to have on that episode. And do you believe we're in a simulation?
Say that again. Did I what?
Do you believe we're in a simulation, Jay?
Do I believe in it?
No, that we live in one.
Oh, no, I think we live in a real extra perception-based world that is not a projection. It's not a simulation made by aliens or entities or anything else. I think that there's elements, features of the simulation theory that are probably becoming popular because of elements of what's called intelligent design. I'm not a huge, I think there's better arguments than the intelligent design field, but people are figuring out that the older models of a purely kind of chaotic universe don't really explain a lot of the data, a lot of the configuring that goes into things like DNA and how precise and how structured it really is. And so they're noticing things about the world that suggest, hey, maybe there is design here that we've kind of been arguing against since Darwin, or maybe even back to David Hume or Immanuel Kant. And so they're thinking, well, since there are these features of order and design, maybe it's not a god, but it's this other kind of computer-based thing, because everybody's so immersed in computer culture, internet culture, since the 90s. This has really kind of become omnipresent. So I think those are the two reasons why, just the popularity of computers, some of the aspects of the old sort of Darwinian model is collapsing in the face of a lot of discoveries relating to what you could call kind of design. So those are things that I think contribute to why people think that simulation theory is true. But I think there's other philosophical reasons to refuting simulation theory and why I wouldn't be a proponent of it.
I want to hear those in a minute, but I was just going to say, when I hear people talk about simulation theory, it seems like a good way for atheists. Like it's become a gateway drug for atheists to believe in a form of religion. And now they're just like superimposing modernity onto their modern religion. But what would be your arguments then against that, against simulation theories, and we're living in a zeros and ones world?
Yeah, some of the philosophical critiques that I think are pretty convincing are, on the one hand, if we were living in a simulation, it would be very difficult to prove it, know it, or demonstrate it. And so, ironically, this is actually very similar to a lot of ancient philosophical systems like Platonism, Neoplatonism, and Gnosticism. Although they obviously didn't have the computer component, those worldviews did propose that the reality that we experience is some kind of hologram or some sort of synthetic Maya illusory thing. And so they're kind of analogs, or they're kind of like proto versions of today's sim theory. And the central first obvious critique that I would give is if we are in a simulation theory, the problem immediately becomes my knowledge of it being a simulation is kind of part of the simulation. So I'm sort of caught in this cycle, this circle that I can never really get out of it, because just like in those ancient worldviews, one of the classic critiques is, if all reality is an illusion, my coming to discover all reality is illusion is also part of the illusion. So it doesn't really get me anywhere. Another critique would be something like, how do we know that there is this other reality if we are enmeshed in a simulation? And so it kind of begs the question, because I could say there's this other hyper reality or super reality or beyond reality that I know, but I really don't know that. I have no way to actually assess that or compare it to what I'm calling the fake reality. And that's the thing in question. So in other words, if I'm in a simulation, then that kind of assumes this is not real. Then there's this other dimension that's real. But how do I know that? I don't. In other words, I don't have a justification for assuming the thing in question.
And we should say, I guess, sorry to interrupt, but we should say, for those who don't know, I guess some proponents of simulation theory would say that because we have seen developments in technology or something like video games in the past 50 years advance so rapidly that, it's almost impossible to not be in a simulation, because you see how great technology is going, how fast it's going, that chances are we are in some form of simulation in the far future, some might say. I believe that's maybe some of the earlier people to come up with that theory. I'm spacing on the one guy's name who actually came up with this.
Rizwan Virk.
I'm thinking of someone else too. I can't.
Well, the original, it's Nick Bostrom's original.
That's
paper,
what I was thinking of. Right.
The more recent book, I read his book before I was doing an analysis of sim theory like a year ago, and he wrote a more recent, updated version of it. He's like an MIT computer guy who also kind of piggybacks on Bostrom's theory, but he makes a very similar argument to what you're saying, that, well, if we're in a really advanced, future that we don't know about. But again, although it's fun, I guess, to do thought experiments like that, from a philosophy standpoint, it's a different thing to actually demonstrate that you know that to be the case. So we can have all kinds of theories, but how do we know that it actually is the case, that there's this other world? And we don't know that. That's the point I'm making, is that it's really an unjustified leap from the fact that computer technology is advancing to then leap to, well, maybe it has advanced like infinitely and we're in some sort of, it's the year 1 zillion and we're inside some big vat or something like that. And we're in a matrix. I mean, the point again, though, is that we don't really know, and we couldn't really know if that's the case.
Right.
And there's a lot of other routes that you could take to critique this stuff too. But
when you tell someone who believes in simulation theory that, and they might know that you're Christian like myself, I believe you are. What if they say to you, you don't know about your world that you believe in, about eternal life? So like, what's your argument back to them? If they say, well, that's just basically you're saying the same thing about me that you believe.
Well, I would argue that's not the case. We do know, and that's why I think it ultimately goes back to philosophy. So I use philosophical types of argumentations to demonstrate how I would go about knowing, or what the best possible knowledge in this case would be. And it would be something like the impossibility of the contrary. So again, if we think back to what if we live in a dream, or we're in a simulation, or it's all fake or something like that? Again, a very basic philosophical critique of that system is, if that is the case, then knowledge of the system or knowledge of that being the case becomes impossible. And if that happens, you're at what's called a fundamental paradigm level contradiction. If that happens, then true knowledge, and what I mean by knowledge is not just like every day, like, oh, I believe that, the sun will rise tomorrow. I believe that, the bedside table is not going to turn to sand or quicksand or something. I'm talking about justified true belief in the sense of, like, I have a reason with basis in fact, with coherence behind it to justify my belief. And so that's why I think philosophy is really crucial to refuting the kind of claim that, well, you're in no better boat than me because you're a theist. And the difference is that in a theistic worldview, there is a basis for believing in the regularity of nature, for the external world, for identity over time, or all these things that really if they're true, they run counter to the simulation model of the world. If that makes sense.
Oh yeah, and then I think I believe we live in God's reality, which people who believe in simulation theory would say that's base reality, that's original reality. My feeling is that people have built a sort of simulation on top of reality, a fake reality that they do, and we can transition into a lot of stuff you've written about and you talk about, where whether it's the news, whether it's the CIA, whether it's occultists, you name it, elites, they're churning out fake realities that infect base reality, right? And then people buy into those realities, and so they're basically walking in their own like mental simulation built by these other people, right? So I guess to some degree that's the simulation I think a lot of people are finding themselves in, but we walk amongst each other.
Yeah, I think what happens is that, like you're saying, there's a metaphor or an allegory here, like the Matrix. I kind of see it as an allegory or a metaphor, although it might get more and more real as we, move towards coom pods and living inside of a Matrix. Really, I think it's an allegory for a system that's vampiric and uses humans as batteries and all that. And so, yeah, when we think about these entities that try to control our perception, the Tavistock Institute, public opinion, Bernays propaganda, the CIA, all that stuff, they absolutely put out synthetic narratives and synthetic overlays to explain the world and to indoctrinate us. And I think in that sense, yes, it is. Those are simulations or they're simulacra. But I think what happens is sometimes people take the analogies or the metaphors and they literalize those and think, well, everything is an illusion. Really, that's the origin of a lot of the Far Eastern religions, going back to ancient Hinduism or even Buddhism. This realm is an illusion. It's a cloak. It's a dream. You got to tear it away. But I don't think that it's metaphysically all fake and gay. It's like the systems that they give you are fake and gay.
Right.
That's how I see that.
Yeah, I'm with you. So when it comes to, earlier I was telling you I was looking at your book from 2018 to your two books so far, Esoteric Hollywood. Is that a lot of their purpose is to distort your perception of reality and remove you further, take you further from God? Is that just one aspect of like their goal here, to destroy your perception? Do they have a goal? Is it just confusion? Is it just power over your mind?
Yeah, I think Kissinger had a really important quote about that. He didn't care what happened in this or that event. He just basically said, all we have to do is control the perception. Controlling the perception is more important than controlling what actually happened. We don't care, right? And if you read 1984, that's the essence of the famous chapter where O'Brien and Winston are having that debate over philosophy and metaphysics. And O'Brien basically just says, Winston, I don't care what 2 + 2 really equals. I want you to agree with me because the party says 2 + 2 = 5. Right. So I don't want you to tell me that because you think that's what I want to hear, Winston. I want you to actually believe it because the party says it. So I think absolutely from the vantage point of the system establishment, they want people to be completely dependent upon it, to completely see it as dictating reality. Has nothing to do with what really is reality. And that's a key role that Hollywood played. Maybe not so much nowadays. It's kind of conceded to the internet and streaming and video games, but at least throughout the last century, for the most part, I think it was Bernays that said, Hollywood was the most powerful engine of propaganda the world's ever seen. Yeah. And so the ability to manipulate time and imagery and symbolism and to tell a story with music and editing and all of that became this amazing, not just a form of art, but obviously a weapon. And from the vantage point of the military, the government, the establishment, the intelligence agencies, they have been absolutely intertwined from the very origins, actually, of Hollywood, using it for those purposes.
Can you briefly describe Bernays and what he was doing to the American public?
Yeah, Bernays, if you don't know, wrote this famous book called Propaganda, and he was involved in working at what at that time was called the Defense Department. or excuse me, it was called the War Department, and he came with this idea to rename it the Department of Defense. So being involved in war, it made it a lot better to sell it as if it was the Department of Defense. And it wasn't just Bernays. He was actually working with a lot of other figures who, around the time of World War II, were very involved in operations, psychological operations, people out of the OSS, Paley, Sarnoff, others, people from ad agencies. So if you've ever watched the TV show Mad Men, the Don Draper character is kind of this kind of person, somebody who was in the wartime who then goes into advertising because he's learned a lot about the human psyche, how it works, its human motivations, all this. And so as you can see, it would be very useful, not just in advertising, but also in propagandizing. And really, those are the same things. I mean, you're really doing the same thing. You have the same goal, whether you're a military psyops guy or a Madison Avenue Don Draper type of guy. So Bernays is kind of doing the exact same type of stuff. And he writes this very famous book, which on the very first page basically admits that everything that you believe and that you do and that your desires and your choices are not your own. They're given to you by an elite that you don't know any of them, their names, their jobs, or occupations, because they're social engineers.
That's right.
And so essentially he's just admitting that the system controls us through these means. And primarily, he's not writing about government propaganda. He's writing about corporate advertising and propaganda. So he's saying, he gives these examples of like, we came up with this idea to sell zillions of bars of soap by coming up with a soap contest. And like children had to whittle soap into something. I mean, just these silly things. And, the cigarettes are freedom torches, not cigarettes, right? So they become signs of rebellion and liberty and on and on and on. And it's all just about, convincing people to buy the product. But he's also stressing that it's much more than just selling products and selling junk. It's selling ideas. It is psychological warfare.
Yeah, it totally is. And he's working to just warp the way you see the world around you, and then they can control you. Or do you think the Western mind has ever been immune to that? Like, is this something that's just people have been doing to one another forever? Or did someone like Bernays really perfect it and then take advantage of the West, like hijack Western perception or American perception?
Well, few people know probably that the term propaganda actually comes from the Holy Office of Propaganda, which is the Holy Office of Inquisition. Now, I don't have as necessarily a negative view of this as most people probably do. Most people just sort of go with like mainline historical narratives, and they think, the Inquisition burned millions of witches. It's not true. There weren't millions of witches throughout. Medieval Europe didn't have millions of witches. There weren't that many people. So, but they did what the Inquisition did do was perfect the notion of propaganda way before Bernays, and they really at that time were focused on promoting the papacy, the office of the Pope, convincing people of the legitimacy of whatever Rome was up to. So I'm very critical of the papacy, but propaganda itself is just a tool, right? And it can be used for good or for bad. I mean, you and I right now, we're kind of engaging in a form of propaganda. We want to promote our message because we think our message is healthy. We think it's positive. It's better than the system's message. So propaganda is a tool. The Holy Office actually perfected this idea. So Bernays is really just building on a lot of people before him. And although it might surprise people, even Lenin was actually pretty good at propaganda. So it's not just a corporate thing. V.I. Lenin actually utilized a lot of, shall we say, Western ideas of propaganda. The followers of Tiny Mustache Man utilized the same techniques and tricks of propaganda, because I think really it's just a lot of human psychology and figuring out what motivates humans to choose this or that. And so it's going to be used for good or for bad. As to whether the West was immune to it, I think as a lot of contributing factors, as we've gotten stupider by design, as the West adopted, especially America, adopted the Prussian and Soviet models of education, which focused on socializing people and not teaching them to be critical thinkers. Those are key things that sent us down this downward spiral of being more easily propagandized and indoctrinated rather than reacting to things on the basis of analysis. The system, all of this is about getting you to react emotively. And so I think that's that's where we are now.
Yeah.
The total reactionary. Nobody can sit and reason through things. They just react.
Yeah. Maybe I naively thought for a brief time that things like the phone, like the smartphone, oddly named, or social media would democratize or maybe unshackle people from the TV that I grew up thinking was the great arbiter of the authority of truth.
Yeah.
But it actually accelerated and went the opposite direction and turned everyone into a zombie. And I've noticed people, is so easily believe what they've been told if they've bought into a caricature of literally anything, whether it's Trump, whether, you name the person that this person has as a caricature in their mind, you can then be told anything about them and you immediately believe it. And it's like, how do you then break these spells? I don't know. I think about this all the time, and I'm up against it every day in the world.